28th, 2021. This is the Policies and Practices Subcommittee of the Racial Equity and Policing Commission. This meeting is being held electronically pursuant to Salt Lake City's emergency proclamation and determination of the Corps Commissioners. Recordings of these meetings can be found on the city's YouTube channel, and minutes can also be found on the city's website and the Racial Equity and Policing website. So with that said, I also want to welcome, aside from staff and commission members, Jessica Waters and Mark Cottrell, city attorney, and Jessica, there she is. And then let me briefly go over the agenda, share my screen here. I emailed it out to everybody, but want to just share this so we're all on the same page. All right, let me know if you can see that.
Yeah, we can see it now. Thank you.
Yes.
All right, good. So just wanted to spend, and for Chaffin and Subcommittee, this is Mountain Time, so don't get confused with the time. I always get that mixed up, coordinating with you two, but just give a few minutes to just debriefing, getting some thoughts on the last two group listening sessions held over the past couple weeks. And then wanted to move in, I apologize, this is reverse order. This is how we had it laid out in our previous, but I think because of the personnel we have and just how this unfolds, it might be best to spend some time on number 3 below, which just an update from the chief on the status of the training around the history of policing. He has some updates on where we are with that. Moises gave some information to us last commission meeting, and they've been moving that along. So chief will give us an update and then circle back on the body worn camera ordinance and discussion we had on that before jumping into 2 and then 1, and they kind of correlate with each other, but Jessica and Chief have joined us today to help the subcommittee understand and assess the current response process and some of our discussion that we've had related to collaborations and relationships with local mental health and social service organizations, and this response model and what it looks like currently, and thoughts the subcommittee has on recommendations moving forward. So any questions or comments on that agenda? Does that look good to everybody? All right, great. Chaffin and Subcommittee, we had a good discussion the past few days on the listening session. Maybe you two could share some of your thoughts and lead a little discussion for the next 10 minutes on takeaways from that and where they'd like to see those discussions head.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I want to say it was, thank you for allowing us to join, and on the listening sessions and being a part of that process. And what I kind of wanted to do, was hoping to do here is kind of give space to you all to hear about, hear your perspective in terms of how you thought it went. I'm happy to share my opinion, but we were kind of outsiders, but I would kind of want to hear from you all, like, what did you think? What struck home for you? What did you learn? What were your takeaways? Right. And thank you, hey, Commissioner Powell. Thanks for coming on to screen there. I appreciate it. It's good seeing you. So I want to go ahead and open it up, and I see Commissioner Shiflett, you're off mute, so go ahead. You start.
Actually, I was in both meetings, and I felt that most of the officers were actually interested in hearing what we had to say, and that they were listening to what we had to say. I felt good about that. I really did. I really felt like they were willing and they wanted to listen. So that was good. I also, um, there was a little tension, but we were able to speak freely. And I think they were able to speak freely, which made it a conversation. Today I was thinking maybe we now need to hear what they think about what's going on. Maybe we didn't hear that as much, but what they think.
Hmm.
So like reverse the conversation to hear, because I'm telling you my reality, and maybe I want to hear your reality. Is that the right way to put that? I want to hear what you're thinking from what I'm saying,
Hmm.
or what's going on in the world. So I thought that was a good conversation. Was one more thing that oh, I wasn't surprised because we know that racism happens in the workplace, but it really hurt to hear that officers have to deal with racism first. You walk in the door and you gotta, oh no, here I go. I gotta deal with this. That in house, but it's just common in every
Mhm.
workplace. But here you've got that layer on top of everything else. So that I think that's
Well,
about all
thank
I
you so
have to
much. I
share.
mean, first of all, I'm hearing you say that it was good that you felt heard, like they were listening. And now you're saying maybe it would be nice for for you all to maybe listen to them as well. So there's a lot of kind of sharing, but it felt like it was maybe one sided. It was also enlightening for you to hear that they also deal with challenges, in the workplace. And you mentioned your survey as well. That could maybe look into that deeper.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, of course, it's not perfect. We haven't fixed it. There's a
Mhm.
whole lot to learn. But for someone, I think I can't remember who had said this. I want to hear from you,
Mhm.
and I felt heard.
Mm.
So that's just me. I mean, we got a long way to go.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Who else would like to share their thoughts about the listening session? Yeah, Commissioner Powell.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Commissioner Shiflett. Good afternoon, commissioners and city staff members, as well as Chief Brown. Um, sorry, I'm scrolling through my notes. One of the things I took from it for the there's not a mutual understanding of what compliance entails. And I think that's where I have a lot of internal strife. Because for me, I feel like I see the issue and its multi-complexity in its entirety. And it's been hard to sit through hearing many different times that there's not one acceptable way of receiving justice through the system. It seems like from a perspective of law enforcement, compliance is what they seek, and that's the only thing that can resolve situations. For me to hear that, it hurts me and it scares me. It makes me feel like I'm living in a police state. It reminds me that my civil liberties, that my father, who is an African American staff sergeant in the Marine Corps, who went to Somalia from the south side of Chicago, he didn't come back to receive the level of injustices that he's experienced. And as his son, I understand service more than any other kid. Through his inspiration, I joined the Explorers program. And I feel like I've taken multiple avenues to understand the complexity of the identity of a police officer. but I feel like I've yet to meet many officers that can understand the complexity of my identity as a Black man. And what I struggle with is how to educate and externalize these fears and beliefs and realities, because these are realities. I saw a post the other day that aligned with multiple people of color who've experienced police use of force, and it talked about the day-to-day things they were doing when they were stopped and then killed. And for me, it reminds me that it doesn't need to even be an intense situation. It can be a situation where I can be walking home and I can be stopped by another citizen, and my investigation won't be handled and taken seriously. That's a fear I have as well, of the procedures that occurred, not necessarily within my department here locally, but also the citizens I interact with. There's white supremacists in my community that have no problem driving through and setting up rallies. And I have a hard time when I feel like I can't rely on the protectors in my community in times of crises so to hear that compliance was what law enforcement wanted, it utterly shocked me.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. And you shared a lot there, and I think that just kind of gives us a peek into why these conversations are so important, and why we need more space to go deeper. Because I don't know if we had the time, or really we didn't have enough of the frame, the container wasn't large enough to have that conversation. And I think that's the conversation that we do need to have, because I'm sure that, as Chief Brown is listening, or any other law enforcement officers listening, they may have some, like, hey, like, of course, when you say compliance, I'm sure they mean something. And you said we need a mutual understanding of what compliance means. And then you also talked about the layers behind that, what it means for you, and the lack of support you feel for the having the enforcers, the law enforcement community there protecting your protectors, and that that you feel scared, you feel concerned. You talked about the white supremacists that may be in the neighborhood of the community that can do things. So I hear your frustration. I hear your concern, and thank you for sharing that. I know, and this time right here is really to kind of just to do a bit of reflection. So thank you for that. And I want to just kind of create space for continued dialogue in that, and let us, and kind of say to everybody here that that's an opening for more conversation. Absolutely.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. Any other thoughts about the listening session? Yes, Steve. Commissioner, I'm sorry. How do you say your list? Andrew Weirden. Yeah. Commissioner Weirden. Yes.
I prefer Steve, but thank you for your thoughtfulness. MJ, thanks for sharing that and that perspective. Listening to officers and sharing your personal experience and your history, I think that's incredibly important. I was not in the same session as you or Carol. I was on the other one, and I made some notes on my phone that have just blacked out, so I'm going to try to remember as best I can. One thing I noticed, though, is I felt like commissioners and officers were talking past each other, and in part because commissioners, from the perspective of communities of color, had a strong emphasis on history, and then some of the officers would say, "Well, I don't understand where this fear comes from." And a little frustrating to me that the officers had trouble processing when he was talking about that history piece. And I've always felt, as retired law enforcement, or from my law enforcement career, that it's hard to see past your personal investment caring for the community and understanding the history of the systems that we represent. And I just really feel like we miss each other on that, and tried to make some comments about how much I respect and appreciate law enforcement, and they do put their lives on the line every day and how important that is. And historically, as law enforcement, we've not included the community in how we're going to serve the community. And because we missed that piece, it's a huge gap there in trust and legitimacy. And try to make those connections. Hopefully, my comments weren't hurtful to law enforcement that I love and respect. We got to do better about including community in the work that we do. And I'd like to think that we at least started to make those connections, because I want community to know how hard officers work on our behalf, but I want officers to know how we miss the boat a lot in terms of what we're trying to connect with the community. And I think unless or until we make that connection, we have a hard time meeting those needs. So I'm an advocate for teaching the history of our communities, advocate for taking time to share with officers what that fear looks like, so we can try to process and break down that fear to get to a good investigation, to MJ's point, so that we can actually make help the person that we're interacting with feel like they're going to get the best services from the department. And that's a concept of legitimacy of policing that I think we need to increase. And then the second piece, of course, the sessions came with the verdict, with the Siobhan guilty verdict. I wasn't sure that the jury would have the courage to convict him. Juries have a hard time convicting police officers, and I feel like community wants law enforcement to be held to the same standard of accountability in the criminal justice system that they are. And historically, I don't think that's the case. And because of that, I've really advocated for and wanted to be on this particular committee, because I think the more we can do with policy for accountability. Now, I think we should train officers to be successful. And once they have that good training to be in compliance with policy, if they're not in compliance with it anymore, then we can take action, get them out of law enforcement. That's not justice through the criminal justice system, but it can create change in the culture of our department. So I've always pushed for that. And part of the exploration we had on our committee was a feeling of hope that maybe this opens the door for more accountability for law enforcement in the criminal justice system, in addition to administrative actions. And so those are some of the key takeaways for me. And thanks for giving me a few minutes to express that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Commissioner. So I'm hearing, first of all, I think that's part of one of the agenda items is history. And then obviously we're on the policy committee here. I want to be mindful of time, though. I know we allocated 15 minutes to this kind of debrief. And so I don't know, Josh, where are we at on time, and where do you think we should go from here?
Yeah, as usual, we're over time. I want to give people space, and there's always a challenge with time. And so I welcome any comments offline or further discussions, but as all three of those commissioners that commented said, this is the beginning of a discussion. And I commend every commissioner and every member of law enforcement that engaged in that call. There was value from each side. And while some of the comments might not have been easy to state and to hear, they were important to the discussion. All of them, from law enforcement to every commission member. So thank you for participating. I would say, Shafin, that several of them do tie into that next agenda item that I'd love to dive into, and that is a topic that this subcommittee has talked about a lot, and as has the training subcommittee, and this subcommittee recommended that history of policing training be offered and developed. And I know that was passed on to the training subcommittee and has been in development. So I think this dovetails nicely into a discussion on that. And Chief Brown and I spoke earlier, and he's willing to give an update on where that's gone, where it is, and what the commission can expect moving forward.
Excellent.
Thank you, Josh. Commissioners, thank you. It's good to see you again. I missed you last. Well, we haven't been able to talk for a couple of weeks, so it's good to see you. Look, I take, and I've been listening very, very carefully over the months, and we have an opportunity, and one of your recommendations is to provide training to our law enforcement officers of the history of policing in the neighborhoods we serve. But I think it's a bigger conversation than just here in Salt Lake City. I think it really encompasses policing in our country and where we came from. And I kind of go back to one of the very first sessions we had was when Dante kind of gave us a PowerPoint overview of policing, which I thought was very good. But we have an opportunity. I have an opportunity. I shouldn't say we, because together we're going to come together and make this training component meaningful. And we can't afford to miss the mark. We just can't. So I reached out to Josh and I reached out to Dante and I said, look, please tell me in very much detail what this training is going to be. And I got some conversation back from Josh and Dante, but I want you to know I'm taking this very serious. I reached out to Commissioner Prosperos, and I found out he was down in Texas visiting his family. And I think Commissioner Angie Warden was with him. And so I finally got them back from Texas. And I said, I need to meet with you. And I talked to Commissioner Hawkins. And tomorrow, I believe tomorrow afternoon, we're going to sit down and talk. And I want to get from his perspective, and Steve and Tanya, your perspective as to what this training really should be and how we build this out. Because this can't be a training that is presented by us. It can't be law enforcement training law enforcement to the conversation. We can't have those the hard conversations that we're talking about right now. Us talking to us, you know what I mean? It's got to be members of our community. It's got to be members of diverse backgrounds from the neighborhoods we serve. And so I want to get their input to see who should provide this training. I think it should be community-based. I think it needs to come from the members of our community, from kind of a grassroots position to really talk about it. But then to have those conversations, it's got to be, we really got to have, honesty and trust. And like Commissioner Angie Warden talks about, we can't talk past each other. We got to talk to each other and understand each other. So tomorrow we're going to sit down and talk about that and design that, because this is not just for new hires or lateral hires like we talked about. This is in talking with Dante, this would be something that we train the entire police department to. And then it's not just one and done. You don't check the box and you're done. This is the conversation in 6 months, or this is a continued conversation. This is a never evolving conversation. Really, the conversation should never end. So that's what I want to do. I'm looking, but it's a big lift and it's a big commitment, because I've got to have community members. When we train a department of 600, I know that's Chiffon, that's not anywhere near what LAPD is, but it's just as important to us. So we do our trimester trainings about 20 different times, so that we can get all the different shifts and all the different units and in to have that training. So it's not like you can just, and I don't want to do it on a virtual thing or a pre-recorded thing. I think it needs to be live and real. But I need people committed to come in and do it 20 different times over the course of maybe 6 weeks. And then as we prepare for the next time to do this training, again, we need a core or a cadre of training community members to come in and do this. And so I've been talking with Tanya and Commissioner Prosperos about revamping our community advisory board. And I've talked to some very good leaders in our community from all the communities that we serve. And I'd like to bring them together to see if they would volunteer, or even some of you commissioners, if you'd like to be on this training cadre and come in and talk and have these conversations that we're talking about. Anyway, those are my thoughts. And I'm going to meet with those commissioners tomorrow and to start that conversation, because to me as a chief, I can't miss on this. We can't miss. We can't afford to miss. So Any questions of me on that?
Thank you, Chief. Sounds like, yeah, you've been moving along. You've got some good folks in town. We'll have a discussion tomorrow. And so can I assume that there'll be a further report, the full commission meeting in a week from tonight?
I'll be there. I'll be there. And then the second part of that is as we get ready to hire. I know Dr. Prosperos and Steve, and I want them to come in and look at our hiring of laterals, the process, the entire process from start to finish, where people are, where the applicants come in, where we review them, where we interview them, as we put them through an MCAT or a situation where they have to write a report, and to view that and give us input and direction on how we can improve that. So
Awesome.
like I say, I just want to be open and transparent. Twofold tomorrow, but we'll start those conversations and then report back to you.
Thank you. I see hands from Suk Cimarron, Commissioner Banuri jumped on. I see a hand from her after Suk Cimarron, and then Commissioner Shiplet made a comment, and let her speak to that. Thank you.
Very briefly, thank you all. Thank you, Chief Brown. Thank you, Commissioner Powell, Commissioner Shiflett, Commissioner Anja Verdon for your helpful, very helpful comments that move us in the right direction. I want to quickly comment on what Chief Brown said, and then make an observation. And it's more of an offer than a comment. An offer is Chief Brown and others. We have been developing training material at Pepperdine for last 4 to 5 years. I've got content from NYPD, as you know, is the largest PD in the country. I have my own training materials. I'll be very willing to help anybody if you need, if you think that will be helpful, sharing anything we have and talking to anyone here without a need to take something back from you, just an offer to help. So if that helps anyone, and I appreciate you, Chief Brown, inviting the commissioners here, inviting the community to belong to the training. That is such a, I just wanted to pause and commend you for that. And I appreciate your tone more than everything you said. It's important to have a right tone, and I appreciate the way you spoke, not just what you spoke. My last comment, and I'm going to hear from the other commissioners, is the previous 3 commissioners who spoke. I just want to quickly tell you in my summary, what I heard was powerful. And in my summary, as you all know, what's happening in India today is very tragic. And sometimes until it hits home, we don't understand the power that things carry with us. So I appreciate you sharing how powerful it is when somebody says something, when we use a word, when we use even a word, is it within the powers of the complicity? Is it that, and how hard that can hit someone. I appreciate you sharing that, because that educates people like me. Back to, I think, Commissioner, is it Commissioner Banuri who wanted to say next? Please go ahead.
You're on mute. You're muted.
Okay. I said apology for being in an informal setting. The moment I heard training and community and everything, I had to jump in. That's one of our wishes, Chief Brown. And if you would allow us to come into that space to be able to educate from the perspective, I mean, once again, every community has many different layers and dimensions. My organization is a coalition of Muslim organizations across the state. And we also work with some data-driven national organizations that can provide that historical perspective in a more, let's say, not just through one community, but like I keep saying, Muslims are not monolith. There are many, many different sort of layers to us. So I would really, really appreciate to be part of that conversation, part of that training, whatever it takes for us to help, educate, help learn ourselves as well. I would welcome the opportunity. And I do want the training material that was just mentioned. I'd love to take a look at it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Banuri and Dr. Singh, and you're such a valuable part of our team, and you had mentioned that to me yesterday. I'm glad you brought it up here. Commissioner Berneri, you mentioned your desire to be involved and said a we. When you say we, are you talking this subcommittee, the commission, the organization that you're a part of? All of the above. How much of you and the we do we get?
So, yeah, Chief Brown knows I head a local organization, grassroots organization, which is called Utah Muslim Civic League. And we are a coalition of almost every single mosque in the state now and every service organization. So we have multiple ways to inform policy and policy decisions.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Commissioner Shiflett, did you want to make a comment on your comment in the chat?
No, I think Chief Brown, were you in on this phone call, or was it just you, Josh, when we talked to the officer who's already doing training with these 3 people that I put in the chat room? They're
Utah
doing,
Highway Patrol.
yeah. I don't know if Chief Brown was on that conversation or not.
Brown's been well engaged on so many different calls, I can't keep track of them.
This was
No,
these are people in the community. Commissioner Davis, I forget not to say Pastor Davis because he's in this. Yes, Commissioner Davis knows all 3 of them, but I know they have done training. And Josh, you did a call with Highway Patrol and their training. So I just wanted to throw those 3 names out there. I also wanted to say that I agree that we should have Shafran and Cimarron in the training. I think because we brought them in for a reason, and because they already have the experience and they already have some material, that might help to have them in on the training. I love with Commissioner Bunari said, just about the intersectionalities of culture. There's so many intersectionalities. You're not just learning about the Black community, although we're the ones who are being killed at a higher rate these days, but just learning about the intersectionalities in general is important. So that's only, I mean, I'd love to be in on it, but I don't know if I have time.
Thank you, Commissioner Shiflett.
Well,
Appreciate that. So Chief Brown, there you go. You could feel free to contact Cimarron, Dr. Singh or Shafin directly and coordinate that. Thank you, Chief. Look forward.
Thank you for your help and your willingness to be involved. Thank you. I'm humbled. I'll be reaching out to you. Thank you.
All right, excellent. The next item I wanted to get feedback on from the commission, and I know it's been, or the subcommittee, it's been a while, but we have had some robust discussions around the body worn camera ordinance and corresponding policy and procedure. Sergeant Gibbons was great, as were you, Chief Brown, and walking us through that and talking about that. It sounds like to me, and I want to test this with the subcommittee, that there is a feeling that best practices are being followed, and the city is calling for accountability and transparency in those. There were some questions around funding and recording from Commissioner Powell specifically, I remember, and want to ensure those were answered. And if there are any follow-up questions, and if the commission would feel comfortable making a recommendation related to the body worn camera ordinance and policy, if it follows best practices, to state that, or if we feel like there's something else that could be done, we state that and make a recommendation. Anything you want to add to that, Chief?
No, what I mean, I think we have some good policies. I think we have some of the best practices in the state, if not nationally. Is there more that we can do? There's always more. If you're coasting, you're going downhill. So I always think let's keep pushing for the very best we can provide, openness and transparency. But I do think we're on some pretty good ground. I know Matrix, the other auditing component to the city, is looked at the camera system as well, and there's going to be further conversation there. But if you're comfortable with what you've heard from Sergeant Mason Givens, and you want to make any recommendations, or if you have any further questions, we can build upon that. But I'm open to any suggestions or what direction you'd like to go.
All right, let me open it up for any comments, response to that for the next few minutes. Commissioner Shiflett.
I was wondering if you all read the article, The Audit of Salt Lake City Police Department finds holes in call response transparency. I'm thinking that they mentioned body worn cameras, but I can't. I have it here and I can put it in the box. It was in the paper just this past week. So let me just put it in the chat box. And I didn't know if you had seen it, Chief Brown. And so they're just talking about some holes. It said in call responses. I thought I saw something about body worn cams, but that could have been another article. So, but I didn't know if you knew about this, Chief.
I haven't seen that one yet, Commissioner, but I'll take a look. Thanks for sharing that.
Are you trying to segue into our next agenda item, Commissioner Shiflett, on response? All right.
You're
on
muted.
mute.
She's helping to facilitate though. Go ahead.
I said, no, I thought I saw something in the article about, but it really could have been another article that I saw. So I apologize if I jumped the agenda.
No, you didn't. You're just thinking ahead, which you usually do. You're step ahead.
I went
Commissioner
ahead
Powell.
and search the article quickly with the search finder.
Thank you.
And no worries. And the only thing is,
MJ is in that academic mode where his brain goes to that. Thank you.
when I have to sort through like 30 different textbooks, that's my most favorite tool.
Yeah.
So it says, as far as the operational side of the audit, Matrix Consulting Group listed how they looked at things like how the department disciplines officers, how officers respond to mental health calls, internal affairs, body-worn cameras, and more. So I imagine the release of information from Matrix Consulting will be next week. And paired with what we've, like from my personal input hearing from Detective Groves and Sergeant Gibbons, it's appeared that the ordinance is working towards the right direction of what I think the community is seeking in terms of wanting more accountability. I wanted to clarify, I remember we got an email recently, I think it was about a $36,000 granted increase from the city council for the body-worn cameras. And I was just wondering on how they were planning on applying those additional funds.
Commissioner Powell, I don't want to speak for the council, but I do know they asked for $60,000, and I believe it was for an upgrade or an additional feature to the Axon body-worn camera program, and it allows more accountability and review from of the body-worn cameras. So I think that's what they're looking for. It would be a tool for us to audit, again, our officers' use of the cameras and what's going on out there.
Perfect, thank you.
Great question, Commissioner Powell, and I think that had come up in another meeting, and the response seems to be in line with what Chief Brown mentioned, and I thought of you specifically when I read the response because it did go, I believe, to more accountability and transparency. I'll let Mark Cottrell chime in if he has any further information on that. Otherwise, Cimarron, do you have there you go.
Josh,
He's fast at body language. I can.
You can read me quite well now. I'm worried. and that is the question we have is the current body-worn camera ordinance and corresponding city policy and procedure in line with the best practices and requires sufficient accountability and transparency. How are we defining best practices? Are these national best practices, statewide best practices? I think it'll be good to have clarity on it. I'm sure there is some document somewhere that I hope there is that captures best practices nationwide. But
yes, great point. I'd ask Chief Brown, what is the department's aspiration in regards to best practices? You speak to that quite a bit. How would you define it?
Well, the state law defines a lot of the things that are required, but our policies match or exceed state law in the use, turning on the cameras, making sure that they're downloaded. I mean, that they're on when they should be, and following state law. But I think that some of the transparency, the extent that we go beyond, in our auditing of the cameras. We do our own internal audits within the department. And then the council in their body worn camera policy they're suggesting that there's an outside individual that actually audits so many videos per month as well. So again, those things aren't in state law. I don't know if they're any national law, but I think that I think they're above and beyond the foundational issues of state that the state requires us. So as far as a best practice nationally, I'm not sure there is one. In fact, I know that there's 800,000 police officers in this country. There's over 18,000 police departments. I know some departments, even in this valley, don't have cameras on all their officers. So I think as far as what Salt Lake City is doing, we've been well ahead of the game for many, many years. And I think we're very progressive in the use of our cameras, holding ourselves accountable, and then most important, being transparent to our communities.
That is very helpful. In some ways, you are creating the best practices, if you may, as you're moving along. Okay, that answers my question, Josh.
And just to dovetail a little on what the chief said, the part of the executive orders that the mayor came out with, they're now within policy, are 2 levels of use of force evaluation. Of course, those will also include examination of the camera, right? So 2 more areas to catch and make sure there's consistency. The officers' reports and what we're seeing on the camera. And I'm especially in favor of that last piece that the chief mentioned in the ordinance, where there is random gathering of body-worn camera footage to be examined. That way, it's not just what's being brought to our attention, it's also a proactive way to ensure that we're not missing things. So I think it's pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, I want to make when you talked about what's required by state and then what is exceeded by just your practice. And I think when you do go above and beyond, you definitely want to, highlight that. Like, hey, this is what state requires, but this is something that's above and beyond that we're choosing to do because we just think it's better. I think that's great when you talk about, trust and accountability with the community. It's good for them to understand that, hey, this is stuff that we all have to do. It's just stuff that we don't have to do, but we're doing because we are holding ourselves to a higher standard.
And I would add to my brother was not and do that communication internally within the state and externally. Other PDs can learn from you, right? So it could be a wonderful trend setting for other. Yeah.
Yeah, great, excellent question, Dr. Singh, and then commentary, Commissioner Andrew Weirden and Chaffin pulling it together. Due to interest and time, I would recommend and suggest, if the subcommittee members oblige, that perhaps Dr. Singh, Chaffin, and I put together a statement and run it by you guys before next Wednesday's meeting to see if it captures what we've just discussed here and can put something forward to the commission on Wednesday. Would that be an appropriate way to proceed? Instead of trying to wordsmith something now in commission, I think we've got a sense of where you are and best practice standard, and adding in some language to come up with a statement we can put forward to the subcommittee perhaps Monday, review and work on. Is that a good process to move forward with on this?
So I'm clear, you all will write something up, share it with the commissioners. We'll have a vote of sorts over email, come to a consensus, and share it more broadly next time.
Yes, and if we determine we need more discussion in our subcommittee meeting the following week, we can do that. We don't want to rush it, but if it does captures the intent of the subcommittee, I think we'd like to move it forward. Thank you, Commissioner Andrew Weirden. Did I clarify your clarification statement, or did I muddy it? All right.
Yeah, the hand up, Commissioner Shipsley. Yes.
I have a question. When Chief, you said that you're not sure if there's best practices around the United States or something. Do you know if they're working on that? Because, you can make best practices per state, but again, like people didn't know that you're not supposed to have certain things in your windshield. So do you know if does anybody on this call know if they're working on United States best practices, even just for the basic things? Again, I said last week, I have the handicap sticker that goes in the window, but I know I'm not supposed to put it in, but I can't tell you how many people I see driving around with it in. So those are just the little things. Even the little things matter because that's
Yeah,
what gets people pulled over.
Commissioner, in this day and age right now, especially the culture in this country, which organization isn't working on best practices is a better question. When you talk about IACP, International Associations of Chief Police, they're looking at best practices. Major City Chiefs Association, that's the 78 largest organizations in the country. That's how I know Chief Moore. They're looking at best practices. There are a lot of different groups that are looking. At some point, we'll focus the beam and we'll come down, hopefully, with one really good set of recommendations that'll probably be adopted nationally. At some point, I believe there's got to be some sort of national standard that is a foundational for all law enforcement. You can build and exceed that, but you're going to have to meet this criteria in this country to be,
I want to come to that conference, please. I want to be invited.
Okay. All right.
Got to have some citizens there. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Excellent. All right, thank you. So before we lose Chief Schaffen and Jessica, could we jump into 2 and 1? They interrelate with each other, and Commissioner Shiflett shared an excellent article in their comments earlier on response. Perhaps it'd be helpful to this subcommittee, Chief and Jessica, if you help us understand initially the current process and response model, then we can go from there. And I know you could probably take 2 hours to a day or 2 perhaps on this, but maybe you tell us where we are now, and then Simran Schaffen and I can lead a discussion or engage the subcommittee on where we've been and what we're thinking.
Yes, thank you, Josh. And I want to thank Director Jessica Waters for being here. She actually took the day off, and she jumped back on to be here this afternoon. So thank you, Jessica. And just real quick, look, I've been doing this job for almost 30 years. In the end of this next month, 30 years in law enforcement. But this is what I've kind of observed in my career, and I want to start with this stat and think about this for a minute. In the 1960s, the U.S. population was 150 million people. At that time, we had over 600,000 inpatient beds for mental health treatment. You roll it forward to 2021, there's over 320 million people in this country. Anybody dare guess how many mental health inpatient treatment beds we have in this country right now?
None.
50,000. We've gone from 600 to 50,000. Well, where have we cured mental health in this country? We haven't. And so really the social workers on the street have become law enforcement. And if you start talking about those things, having a mental health illness is not a crime. Being homeless is not a crime. Having a substance abuse disorder is not a crime. Yet at the end of the day, when there's problems or concerns, who do they call? They call the police to deal with these issues. And I'll tell you right now, we're probably the most expensive, least effective organization to try to deal with it. And so in an attempt to try to control our own destiny, because Salt Lake City tends to be the focus of a lot of issues surrounding homelessness and mental health. Back in 2016, we opened up the Community Connection Center. It started with 1 director and Jessica, 5 social workers, 4. And the Community Connection Center was down on 5th West and 2nd South. And at that point, does anyone remember the 5th West Island down there, just west of the Rio Grande? It was populated with probably 2,000 individuals that were really suffering from a lot of these issues. And a lot of people said, Chief, there's no way you're going to have people walk through the front door of a law enforcement hosted social worker program. I said, no way. But we opened the door, we hung up the shingle, and I'm telling you, by the thousands, people came in and needed help. They wanted help. And so, Jessica, I'll let you kind of take it over and go from there. But it's been a huge success for Salt Lake City. And it's something that I know that you're very passionate about, commissioners, and this is a good way to start a conversation, but really expand it into law enforcement and what we're doing today. So Jessica, I'll turn it over to you. And hey, as we have this conversation, please raise your hand. Let's have the conversation as we go, not hold the questions to the end. Josh, I can stay for as long as you need me tonight, okay?
Thanks, Chief. Yeah, like you said, Commissioner King, too, we could go on and on for days about this. I took today off because we were out till 1 a.m. on a hostage negotiation. So a lot of us did 17-hour days yesterday. But the biggest thing for you guys to understand and know about our team, our community connection team, is that we are paired with CIT crisis intervention officers on our squad. I know a few of you have heard my spiel a few times already. And so I recognize some of your faces too. But the biggest thing is, I know in the notes there was a comment made about the Denver STAR program, and I'm very familiar with the Denver STAR program. I've talked with them, one of the people who runs the program. And one thing to know about their program is it's under a year old, and they highly recommend still keeping co-response. So they still do co-response, and they still do the civilian EMS response. Both of those are important, both of those are needed. Just like MCOT, the Mobile Crisis Outreach Team, we work very closely with them. We run cases by each other, we'll call each other to consult on stuff, or we'll kind of talk about high utilizers of 911. So our team focuses on doing 911 response out in the community. I know there's a lot of questions about dispatch and how we divert calls or don't divert calls. I think the most important thing to understand with calls coming in, they aren't always flagged mental health. You may just say an unwanted person on the property. You show up and find out this person escaped the state hospital, is a missing individual. That's not going to come through the air as mental health or mentally ill. So our team, we are call responsive, which means that we are listening to the radio and we pick up those calls. As we hear descriptions, we can kind of be like, okay, that sounds like that one's going to involve some mental health. Let's go out there. So we do focus on suicide, substance use, homelessness, mental health, unwanted, camp stuff. And so I think the biggest thing to know is that our goal is to connect people somewhere else long-term that we can help out in the short term. We focus a lot on the high utilizers of 911, as you'd be surprised at how many people, maybe you are familiar. One of our clients would call 911 20 times a day. 20 times a day say they're suicidal. Officers and fire show up, and EMS, they're not suicidal anymore. They just wanted someone to come out there. And so our team works with those individuals. Maybe someone calls 911 3 times a day reporting a large structural fire. So an entire fire department goes out 3 times in one day. There's no fire happening. He just believes there's fires happening. And so it's costing the city a lot of money, and also it's costing them interactions with 911 when maybe they don't necessarily want that. So our goal is to help connect them. What is it they need, so that they don't have to be crossing lines with 911. And I know there was a comment about jail in there too. I'm just kind of briefly looking over your guys' notes to try and touch on multiple points. I know Chief could talk a lot about our jail system, but it was asking, do we have like a diversion so we don't go to jail? Our diversion is that jail doesn't hold people. So many officers don't want to take someone to jail because they're going to be out in an hour. And I think my social workers advocate for jail more than the officers do. Very rarely will we have an officer say, we want to take them to jail, and we say no. Almost always we say, can you take them to jail? It's time. We've tried to do this and this and this. We can get some stuff set up through the court process. That's the only thing. We know our system is very broken. And sometimes we have to have that route in order to hold people accountable or keep people safe or keep the public safe, because someone is a big threat to the community. So I think it always amazes people to hear that. I mean, we don't take people to jail all the time, or it's pretty rare, but when we do, it's almost always a social worker who says, can we take them to jail? It's time now. And the officers will be like, are you sure? Is there any other route? And so we just try and come up with any creative solutions. And downside is that we are not 24/7. We understand that. And why we do day shift right now with our short staffing is because all of our service providers are open during the day. So if I need to take you to get your injectable, I need to take you to apply for an apartment, I need to take you to get on Medicaid, those are only open during the day shift. And so a lot of our time is also spent doing the follow-up work. So long rant right there, but what questions came up?
Let me jump in just real quick while Jessica catches her breath. She mentioned a couple things. She was out on a hostage negotiation situation last night. Our social workers are part of the hostage negotiation team, the SWAT team. They go out and they have been very instrumental in talking to people that are and resolving situations because they know these people, they know the hooks. I remember, Jessica, you were talking about an individual you knew about his dog and say, ask him about his dog. So it's been a great addition to the work we do, even with our SWAT team. She talked about 911 calls. We look at calls because we do a CompStat model here in Salt Lake City. We look at calls for service. I looked at the week of, this is the week 16, April 19th through the 25. Our calls for service this year are up 16%. Looking at what they are, cell 911 hang-up calls are up 108% this week. In 2020, we had 65. In 2021, we had 135. What is driving up those calls, 911 hangups? Well, Jessica and her team, and we're trying to connect the dots on this one, but they have somebody that needs help or is living in a resource center, and they call 911 10, 20 times a day, and you have to go. And you can't say we're not going. You go to every one of those calls. And so the resources, the amount of resources that we dedicate to one of those calls is astronomical. I mean, if somebody put pen to paper, it's thousands and thousands of dollars. Well, Jess and her team went out and talked to the individual that was calling and says, hey, listen, why are you calling? And Jess, maybe talk a little bit more, but they were just lonely or wanted somebody to talk to. And he said,
yeah, sorry, Chief.
No, you're good. But she said, her social worker said, look, if you don't call, you can call me, but don't call 911. If you do it for an entire week, we're enchiladas on me on Friday, right? You want to tell them about that? It was amazing.
Yes, yes. No, this individual has some intellectual disabilities going on and is homeless, and has some personality diagnosis as well. And so they feel very lonely. They don't know where to go for help, so they always call 911 because the officers are always friendly to them. So they have pet dinosaurs, and so whenever officers show up, they want to talk to the officers with pet dinosaurs, but they're not in a crisis. So yeah, one of my social workers, he did an awesome job of engaging with her. You call me if you're not in a crisis. You can still call 911 if there is a crisis, but if there's something happening. But in the meantime, let's call me and I'll get you your favorite meal. And so she started counting down on Tuesday of that week. Every day she called our social worker. Do I still get my enchiladas, extra sour cream and rice and no refried beans on Friday and Pepsi? And so that really encouraged her, and she stopped calling 20 times a day. And she just called us, not as often, but she still called us to check in. And then, yeah, my social worker went out and delivered her enchiladas. And she was very happy. And, something that she was really looking forward to, something that simple that she just didn't know where to go or how to ask for help.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, so
I made a rookie mistake. I started talking with my mute on, and
So we've been doing this co-responder model for about 3 years. I mean, at some point, Operation Rio Grande kind of cleared out the area of Fifth West, and a lot of people did get help, but a lot of the very shelter-resistant people went into our neighborhoods. And so Jessica and her team in a co-responder model went to find those people, to seek them out and offer those services. And so the co-responder model that she does with her team here in Salt Lake City, she now has 10 social workers, and they do this every day as part of their work. They pair up with officers and go out and try to help. It's been very instrumental in helping people throughout the city. It's been such a success for helping us that it's now, do you want to talk about your BJA learning site?
That's exactly what I was about to touch on, Chief. So we're on the same wavelength. Yeah, so we've been a Bureau Justice Association learning site. So that means any police department can go to the BJA learning site, and there may be 9 police departments now across the US that are kind of seen as not necessarily experts, but have had models happening that are different and unique, CIT or homeless outreach or co-response. And so we get inquiries from police departments across the US asking us for our policies and procedures, how do we create, kind of other racial equity and policing groups in different cities are reaching out to us in hopes that they can apply it to their own agency. And so we don't do a good job at like telling people that we're a part of that. You know, we don't have a PR in our social work unit, and PR will do that stuff for us. But I think that's really important to note is that there's a lot of police departments like Houston and LA, both of those are on that BJA, and we have quarterly phone calls and we consult each other about different policies, or what are you guys doing in dispatch to divert calls? What is your co-response looking like right now with COVID and how the world is functioning today? So that's one thing that we really enjoy being a part of, is helping teach other police departments and train them. And normally they would come in here and they shadow us for a week and go out on calls with us, go to different meetings that we run, and just kind of see how we are created and see if they can bring that back home to their own police department.
Hey, Jessica, you mentioned that collaboration with other agencies and the learning that occurs there. Are there a couple things related specifically to racial equity that you've learned from other departments that are being considered or commissioned that might help with the recommendation to further that along or support that?
Yeah, that's a great point. I still feel like, you know, just being completely honest, I still feel like that's still in the beginning stages in a lot of these other police departments that we work with BJA. A lot of them I've seen to just create some racial equity groups too. One big focus that I've kind of learned and trying to see how we can apply it is focusing on communities of color, or, you know, how do we reach out and have more community policing in those areas to build trust? And also how do we educate them about our crisis response, because they may not think is that it's as accessible to them when it is accessible to everyone. So I think that's been the biggest thing that stood out to me so far, is just this discussion about community policing, building those closer partnerships so people feel safe with us and seeing us in the community.
And Jess, I don't know what the diversity of your squad is, but I think your unit is probably one of the most diverse units in the department.
Yeah, I would say so too. I'm proud of that. My team is incredible. They're awesome. So.
Well, yeah, that's excellent. It sounds like you're thinking along the same lines as this subcommittee and commission on that need. Commissioner Powell and then Commissioner Shiflett have a follow-up. Oh, Cimarron, go ahead. Sorry.
Commissioner Powell was before me, but I had a quick, is it okay for Commissioner Powell if I got a quick question? Okay, thank you. My follow-up is we discussed social workers. Do you have a number on how many overall social workers you're working with? And then any comments on the mental health clinicians as well, or is that going to come future?
So your first question was with mental health and other service providers or social workers. You're asking like how many social workers we're in contact with, is that correct? Oh, I can't even, I could probably name off 40 people right now who are in the community who are social workers that we work closely with.
Okay.
Like that first name basis, phone call them, what's going on with this person? Do you know that they got released from this place? Do you have an idea what to do? That's just me. And then each of my team, they all kind of have their own specialty: housing, substance use, homelessness, mental health, or co-occurring disorders, so substance use and mental health. So I could easily name off 40 social workers that are from different agencies that we work with. Is that answering the question?
It is.
There.
And that's overall the entire PD working with those 40, or just your department?
Just me. So if I were to add up all my social workers, the social work world is the social work community in Salt Lake is very small. The state of Utah issued a crisis because we have a shortage of social workers, just to show like how small the community is. I think our biggest ones that we don't have contact with are privately funded agencies. So like say Sundance Substance Use Treatment Facility, we don't have contact with them. So it's more the private ones that we don't have contact with, but I would say majority of the nonprofit public sector we're very closely working with. And we host a meeting once a month with a lot of these partners to discuss what's happening in the community and frequent callers or high utilizers and how all of us can get involved.
Thank you. Thank you. Very helpful. Commissioner Powell, you had a question.
Thank you. It's been really insightful to hear what you've been saying. I'm currently looking at a news article from Fox 13 now that was recently published, the same one Commissioner Shiflett posted. It's claiming that the Matrix Consulting Group we're actually working with, their Vice President, Ian Brady, is suggesting how their analysis of everything thus far has showed that most mental health calls are more likely to occur in the evening time hours. And it's saying as well that, like, quote unquote, I'll go ahead and quote him, they're only able to provide that co-response 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. and not during the hours in which those types of events where you have that risk for greater use of force in a mental health crisis situation, when those events are most frequently occurring. Again, the evening, late afternoon hours. He said, so we recommend prioritizing a co-response model, making it more available. It sounds like Chief Brown just stated you guys do operate within that co-response model, and you stated that you're following the Denver STAR program, which calls for that model as well. So I don't think having law enforcement a part of the CIT or host team is nearly much as a concern. If anything, I think it provides more security and protection for all people there. But there's additional tools and avenues, such as a different uniformed identifiable person there that can objectively approach the situation without putting maybe a mental health individual or an individual experiencing mental health issues into something like handcuffs. So I think it's saying that his recommendations were redeploying 2 CIT host officers and 2 community connection staff to afternoon shifts. And it also mentioned the need to stagger work days for the teams so that weekdays were also covered. For the department itself, his suggestion was to add 2 additional CIT host staff and an additional clinician. And there was a call for recommended diversions for certain types of calls. This means instead of an officer with the gun and badge responding, Brady indicated someone else would handle the situation. So in terms of like that public call, it's saying that he's trying to, their analysis, we focus on the racial equity portion. So within mental health, 25% of calls with African Americans are actually mental health related, according to a study that Commissioner Salazar Hall sent us earlier to read. When I was reviewing that, it seemed that not necessarily those initial moments were just the huge indicating factor in the intent that was administered through those interactions with law enforcement, but that it was also like law enforcement only really knows through their training one type of way to respond to these situations. And so my crisis is like, I have this huge confliction, right? Like even the young woman who was attempting to hurt her own family members and unfortunately was killed. That was a domestic violence call. And if I can recall correctly, domestic violence calls are one of the most dangerous calls for law enforcement officers to respond to. And here in the state, my concern has been, how would a CIT intervention team during the hours that are currently prescribed be able to respond to those after call hours where even someone like the lady and her 13-year-old's young son, would the team have been available at that time? Or what level of training would that officer have been taught outside of that situation to maybe detract the use of lethal force?
Hey, Commissioner Powell, great questions. Jessica, I'm gonna let you, I'll tee it up and then you hit it out of the park like you always do.
Okay.
But Commissioner, you're right. When you look at that matrix study, I think there's a couple things. They did recommend expanding the social worker program by 2, so that we could cover, I think, 20.5 hours per week, 7 days a week, or in a day, 7 days a week. In conversations with Jessica, we would love to expand the program even beyond that. I think 2 really doesn't do us justice. And in talking with Jessica, it really, we need more than that. And I know Jessica's looking at taking the program far beyond just that. 24/7 type response, having teams available all the time that they can respond. But Jess, you're talking about going on a whole host of different calls that an officer would go on, but you're going with a social worker. So, and I think commissioners, that's what you're talking about. I think I've listened to you for several months now, and I know that this is very near and dear to your heart and something that you would really like to see. I think Salt Lake City and what Jess is talking about doing is really going to be the cutting edge in the country. I think when they are talking about calls for service, they're talking about a civilian force without guns that could take some of the very low level investigative crimes, not so much mental health, but it may be my bicycle was stolen, or I have this, I don't know, some dispute or something like that, very low level that an officer wouldn't need to go to. And in their recommendation, I think they say 20 civilian response team. So maybe the news article kind of pushed them together, but they're separate topics. So Jess, please take it away from there.
Yeah, that was, you had a lot of great points in there, Commissioner Powell. Yeah, I agree. We need to be 24/7. The hard part is it's really hard for me. I'm all about expanding the program. I think people forget expansion of our program also means expansion of officers. So I have 10 social workers, but I only have 4 officers. So at max, I can have 4 squads or 4 teams at a time. And our other social workers are doing all that follow-up work like I talked about. They're going and applying for housing, applying for Social Security, doing all like the behind the scenes case management, therapy. So, in order for my team to do those afternoons, our biggest need is the officer side. And I know, especially right now in today's culture, that's not a thing for people to love to hear. But for my team, it's important that we have the same officers respond to calls with us. And I say that because we go to so many people's houses more than once, that it goes a long ways that they feel safe with that officer. They're familiar with that officer. I know Officer Overman, he's always the one who comes out with me. I know Cruz. I can trust him. He's taken my reports before. So that's our biggest thing, is expanding on our officer side to match that, and we could have more teams. And so we've been just trying to figure out how we can be creative and expanding that, or how we can be out in the community. And I think the biggest part is we do that immediate first on scene responding to calls. And any of these after hour calls, we get referrals. We get, hey, heads up. Usually usually someone's been on the radar for a minute. And we get a heads up like, hey, did you know this person has been doing this in this part of town? Like, are they on your radar? And so we'll go out and reach out to that person. So officers do send a lot of referrals. We have done some afternoon shifts where we did overtime, where we had officers who were able to do it with us and did some overtime shifts in the afternoons. So we know there's a need there. Just the biggest reason why we've in the past have been doing day shift has been for all that follow-up care, because we don't call someone at 8 at night and see how they're doing or take them to their appointment then. But yes, I agree. I do think 24/7 needs to happen. The DV call one, that one's a tricky one, just because we do go to calls that have weapons, but with DV being such a risky thing that they're acting in a totally different mindset, versus mental health. You can talk to someone and bring them down, but with DV, there's like passion behind it, and that's totally different. And so we do not go to DV calls right now. We do currently have a therapist who is working with our victim advocates team. The victim advocate has been sending over some verbals that are coming in. So more of a preventative response of like, they've seen verbals starting before a DV escalates. And so she's been sending some verbals to our therapist, and she's been reaching out to those perpetrators to see like, hey, are you in need of therapy? Are you need services? So in hopes that we can prevent some of those DV incidents. I hope that answered all those questions. I know there was a lot to that.
It did for me in terms of the DV. I also appreciate the proactive measure of getting a perpetrator the materials, because as we know, things like domestic violence are often a perpetual cycle, which can often involve not only the participating partners, but children as well. And so just making sure that we have like an environment that's conducive for children to be safe, and making sure that they can be identified and also separated in times of high intention. And then additionally, real quick, before we get over to Commissioner Schiff, but thank you for waiting so long. My last question about that was just the dispatch coordination and trying to get a different call for response module set up and administering that. Where's the department and your organization with the CIT currently at with that?
Commissioner Powell, that's a great question. And I was going to ask that as well. So you're a step ahead of me. Thank you. I just want to do a quick time check since Dante is harassing me on text that I'm stealing his people from his subcommittee. Politely that we'll try and end in the next 10 minutes. I also want to acknowledge there might be some frustration that we get this momentum going and great dialogue, and then we have to end it. Simran and I are going to talk offline to try and come up with some ideas to keep the discussion going offline and also structure. So anyway, back knowing now 9 minutes. Chief, I think you were going to respond, or Jessica.
I assumed Dante would thank you for keeping us over here. Sorry, Mike.
Just real quick, Commissioner Powell, great questions. Lisa Burnett, she was the 911 department head. She recently actually retired, so she's enjoying life. I would like to have somebody come in and talk to you, but she has been very proactive and taking and triaging those calls in dispatch. And if they're very low level mental health calls, she's been transferring those to MCOT and different service providers that don't even come to us, which is really where it should be. The ones that are serious will come to dispatch. So, and Commissioner Powell, I've heard you say this, we would like to see officers go into this CIT or into this social worker model. I really believe we're all talking the same thing. If we can put more social workers aligned with more police officers, we'll be dealing with these calls that we're all talking about in a better way. So,
Chief, have you been able to capture any of the return on investment in those referrals?
For this, I don't even know how to measure it, but let me just give you one example. And this is an example that came from Jessica and her team. I'll read this because I don't have it memorized, but this woman, we call her Jane Doe. She's a 42-year-old female, was identified as a high utilizer during of emergency service providers. Between 2013 and 2016, Jane was involved in over 70 police-related events, had 69 emergency room visits, over 354 non-emergency related visits to hospitals or doctors, and over 1,000 notes in the hospital system. The estimated total cost of Jane's police and medical encounters was calculated to be over $248,000. With case management and intervention of our social workers, Jane was eventually placed on a wait list for the Utah State Hospital. While receiving treatment, Jane voluntarily decided to go to a long-term care center. She has not used any emergency medical services or called for first responders assistance since being placed into a care facility. That is just one individual that has saved the system $250,000, $250,000. I would, people say, well, we don't have the money to invest in a program like that. I'm saying you're spending tenfold on the back end. You should invest on the front end, fix the problem rather than try to keep arresting it and responding on it. So, Jess, you want to add in on that?
And Chief, if you don't mind, I know I'm cutting in line here, but back when I had similar responsibilities to you, and we would have these high utilizers, and not only are we saving money, but those high utilizers are making very extreme calls, which are very resource intensive, which is very expensive. Then our best solution is abuse of 911, where we're trying to criminalize what they're doing, right? So this is so much, it's more cost effective. It helps your officers be more available, and it's such a humane response. So had me at hello. I just wondered if we could count the resources. Sorry.
I'll just make a quick motion here. I want to thank you, Chief Moore, for that information, and that's a great example to read. And also, Miss Waters, you were super helpful in answering all the questions that were asked. And Commissioner Powell, thank you for that engagement. My motion is, can we discuss very briefly point number 1, which is development and funding connections and collaborations between the PD and local mental health and social services. So I know we were going there, but there is a specific recommendation regarding Utah Mental Health Institute. I just want to give you a chance if you say a few words there.
Can I ask my question that may also fall into
Please.
what your response is?
Please do.
Thank you. My question is, you were saying that that it's very accessible for people to use your services. I wanted to know how you make it accessible, first off. And second off, I know for a fact that we don't have a lot of women of color social workers in the state of Utah, which is just absolutely horrible when you're looking for services. So when you say it's accessible, I also know for a fact that students in the College of Social Work say, I don't want to work on that side of town, or they want to work for LDS Social Services. That's a huge problem, because without representation, I can't tell you how hard I looked for a therapist who was a woman of color. So when you say it's accessible, I think that needs to be included into the conversation. I mean, I am a domestic violence and sexual assault worker. That's what I do. And I can tell you that they will not, they don't feel comfortable with the social services, and they don't want to call law enforcement. So even, included with domestic violence and sexual assault. So how can you speak to that? And I don't know if that goes in with Cimarron's question or not. So
Yeah, I think it does, because it was brought up, this relationship with University of Utah Mental Health Institute that I've heard exists, but also those connections and collaborations with mental health and social service organizations. So I think you're spot on, Commissioner Shiflett, and it dovetails nicely off number 1 and where Sue Cimarron wanted to take us.
Okay, if I can, I hope I can keep these straight though. So the first one was about partnering with Hunts Mental Health Institute. I was trying to find the exact question. Increase funding and expand the relationship between SLCPD and University of Utah. And so for me, I don't know if I'm missing anything in this response, but this is where we do a monthly meeting with their team and other service providers. And when I say their team, it's usually the mobile crisis outreach team. And then Hunts Mental Health Institute, I still have to just change the name for it, and ER social workers. The biggest ones we meet with too are ER social workers. And then they also help and train our CIT. So my unit also does all the crisis intervention training for our department, and we partner with West Valley. We conduct it for most of the police departments in Salt Lake County. And so the Hunts Mental Health Institute is one of our main people who come in and represent and train on mental health, on crisis services. And so I feel like we have a close partnership. I think it can always grow more. Hospitals have their own issues with HIPAA stuff. We have our own issues of being in crisis all the time. And when can they share and not share that information? And so I feel like we have a very close partnership. If there is ever an issue through our dispatch, they reach out and say, hey, what happened here? And then vice versa. We reach out to them when they don't respond, because they are 24/7, but there will be times that we have issues of them not responding just because of their own availability with staffing too, because there is a shortage of social workers. So I think MCOT, the Mobile Crisis Outreach Team, they need more teams, they need more funding. I would completely support them in that. And I get that too, because we cross paths a lot. And the difference is they're going out on the more non-violent individuals, and we're going out on those who may have a violence history or known to have weapons, or more likely to be in and out of the jail system because of violence and mental health. So does that answer your question about that question about the partnership with Hunts Mental Health, or did I miss anything in that?
Right, Commissioner Shiflett or Sue Cimarron?
Let Commissioner see if there's a response. Commissioner, you have a response?
Well,
I didn't get to yours yet. Yeah.
You didn't get to me yet.
Yeah.
No, if you have any response on that, I have no follow-up on that question, but if you have any specific questions. Please follow up.
I don't right now because maybe after you answer my question, then I might.
Mhm.
We have 1 minute just to look at the time. So, and if
Okay.
anybody can answer that, it's you, Ms. Waters. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll try as fast as I can. But yes, Commissioner Shiflett, Chief had made a comment that my team is very diverse. Out of the 10 social workers, there are 2 of us who are white. Correction, 3 of us who are white, 3 who are Black, and 3 who are Hispanic. And so I think that's important, is that we have more representation. We're still missing groups. We're still missing other groups for sure. And so our team are constantly talking about, like, does this feel accessible? What does this look like for you? And, there may be like, I had an issue with this, this didn't feel right to me, or this policy doesn't sit right to me. Something about, like my background and how I want to feel safe in that. So for our team, this is more of our own in-house discussions as we change our own policies, our own response criteria, and how we respond to a scene. We do a lot of feedback too, if we are engaging with a person of color, and if we ever see a concern, that we always have debriefs as a staff to just kind of give each other feedback. From my own perspective, my own lived experience, this is what I can say. From someone else's own lived experience, they can say that. And so with accessibility, we still have some barriers, but big one though is being visible in the community. And like you mentioned, social workers aren't always seen in a positive light. People see us like, you're going to take my children away. So sometimes the client experiencing mental health crisis prefers to talk to the officer more than us. Because, the social worker is like, they're going to take my kids away. They're negative, they're the bad person involved. And so we bounce off each other, and we use that to our best advantage. If we see I'm a trigger to someone because I'm a social worker, then I'll have the officer do the main talking, and I'll do behind the scenes work and case management and connecting the services. The nice part is that we're connected to 911, that you don't need to have an actual cell phone service. You can be connected to Wi-Fi and be able to call 911. You can text into the Uni line. With the Huntsman Mental Health Institute, there will be times that they will transfer it to 911 instead of their own team going out on it. So it could start at the Huntsman Mental Health Institute and then end up on our end on police, just like we send it to their end too. I'm sure I missed some in that one, but was that helpful there too?
It was a little helpful. My only other question when you gave me the demographics is, are all of your social workers from the state of Utah?
No, I think 2 are. I think
That's
just 2 are from Utah.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's very important.
I'm a Midwestern over here. We have but 2. I think only 2 are from Utah.
I think 2 of them are from Prince George County.
Oh, whatever.
No, I don't know that. I'm just saying.
No, you don't. It's hard for me to get people to come to Utah. So
It is.
Hey, I just want to say, I know our time is short. Commissioners, thanks for the engaged conversation. This is really good. If we want more, we can have more. The last parting comment is, we love our social workers. They're invaluable to the work we're doing, and I'll go on record to say this is the future of law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
A big part of what we're going to do.
Wonderful. Setting new
think
best
that's
practices. Yeah.
I think that's a great idea, that you're going to engage them. I wanted to be a social worker, but I thought I would take it home, so I didn't do it. So now I'm doing this.
I think your job is harder than social work. So thank you for doing that.
But your question was also equally important, which is, how do we create empathy with people who don't look like us, right? And that's a very good answer by you, Ms. Waters, in terms of your team. But maybe I can put a quick comment that look into the ways in which you can add more diversity for future, whenever you have a chance, right? So just make a note of that, and that will be what I think the commissioner was leading us to.
And saying, if I could just add to that, it's also the overall trust with the department, communities of color, because often when there's a mental health crisis in communities of color or other communities that don't feel safe with law enforcement, it tends to get to a higher crisis level before that call is made, which makes intervention more difficult, right? So the more trust that we can build, the earlier intervention, the more likely we can have a better outcome.
I want to quickly thank everyone. Chief Brown, thank you for your participation. Ms. Waters, thank you. All the commissioners, thank you. Mr. Josh King, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Appreciate it. And Dr. Singh and I have chatted, and we'll be following up Monday, and then we'll coordinate with Hassan to get the notes and our notes and and get something back to you guys. Thank you, Hassan, on staff for participating and helping us on the back end, and all commissioners and law enforcement officers, Lieutenant Zayas and Officer Groves, appreciate it. And Mr. Cottrell, most dedicated attorney I know from the age of 14. Thank you. And there he is. And it might seem like I'm saying that facetiously, but I'm not. He's the best. So thank you all. We'll continue the conversation and follow up. And any offline thoughts or comments, please feel free to call, text, or email me. Thank you all. Dr. Singh, thank you. We appreciate
Thank you
what
all.
you do.
Thank you.